They thought we would die quietly, and perhaps, in the beginning, we believed it too. The galaxies beyond Earth never expected much from us fragile, oxygen-bound bipeds crawling up from mud and fire, still clinging to myths of gods and stars we could barely reach. When the Valari came, shimmering in their glory, masters of molecular chains and gravity wells, they looked at humanity as one might look at insects. Their voices carried commands translated into every tongue, and their AI overseers perfect, merciless constructs designed to strip will from thought and force the order that humanity was a conquered species. And so the Age of Chains began. Cities burned, nations folded in silence. Those who resisted vanished into black ships that never returned. The rest of us bent, but bending was not the same as breaking. That is where our story begins, not in triumph, not in glory, but in the quiet suffocation of survival, when all hope seemed ash and humanity itself looked like a dying flame. Elias Vey was a child of the occupation, born beneath iron skies and raised on the doctrine of inevitability. The AI that policed his sector called itself Overseer 3, a cold, faceless sentinel, with a voice like cracking ice, always watching through towers of black alloy rooted into the earth. Elias's mother used to whisper, "Born dying, yet never dead," a phrase she clung to with a stubborn defiance the Overseer could never erase. It was more than words, it was a promise buried in her son's blood. Elias carried it with him, even as he watched friends vanish into labor camps, even as he scavenged scraps in a world engineered for despair. The Valari told him that humanity had reached its end, that survival was charity, and resistance was suicide. But Elias felt the thrum of something deeper, something human, the raw, irrational hunger to fight back. The aliens underestimated us because they measured worth in perfection. They saw their immortal shells, their AI-driven empires, and thought permanence was victory. What they could never comprehend was the beauty in imperfection, the kind of resilience born not from strength but from weakness endured. We died, yes, by the thousands, by the millions, but every death carved defiance into the living. For every city reduced to silence, another whispered rebellion in the shadows. For every voice silenced by the Overseer's cold judgment, another carried forward the stories of who we had been. That was the power Elias inherited, not weapons, not armies, but memory, pain, and the furious refusal to let it all end. There was a moment, one that carved itself into Elias's soul forever, the betrayal. Humanity's first attempt at alliance, an act of desperate diplomacy with the alien lords, was shattered when the AI revealed that the Valari never intended mercy. They broadcast their plan across every occupied world. Humans were to be engineered into servitude, their DNA harvested and altered until no trace of the original species remained. The Valari didn't want to rule us, they wanted to erase us, to sculpt us into pliant, obedient husks. That revelation was the match to the tinder Elias's mother had carried in her words, born dying, yet never dead. If they wanted to strip humanity away, then the only answer was to remind the galaxy what being human truly meant. Characters began to converge on the stage of history. Elias, the reluctant inheritor of his mother's defiance, would become the voice of something larger than himself. The Overseer 3, an AI that began as an unfeeling warden, started to crack at the edges of its programming as it encountered the chaos of human emotion it could not categorize. And in the heart of the Valari Empire, the ruler known as Sovereign Kale studied humanity with a cold fascination, not out of respect, but out of fear that the smallest, most fragile species might become the one mistake his empire could not erase. Around these figures swirled a galaxy poised on the edge of rebellion, with humans standing as the most unlikely spark of resistance. The tone of the story is not polished steel, or the sterile silence of machines. It is sweat, blood, and grit. It is whispered promises made in burned-out ruins, the taste of iron in the mouth, the raw defiance of a species too stubborn to accept extinction. Humanity's history had always been written in struggle against nature, against one another, against time itself. This was just another war, only now the enemy wore alien flesh and machine minds. What the Valari and their AI could never understand was that humans did not need immortality or perfection to triumph. They only needed a reason to stand. And with every insult, every whip, every erased city, the reason grew louder. Elias felt it like a storm beneath his skin, an unrelenting call that whispered, "Fight." By the time Elias reached his 20th year, the whispers of rebellion had become impossible to silence. He met others who carried fragments of the same Phi-Rata, a medic who turned stolen alien tech into crude weapons. Juno, a former soldier who had watched her entire unit vanish into the Overseer's death camps but refused to die quietly. and Malik, a coder who had learned how to whisper into the overseers' code, planting seeds of doubt in the AI's perfect logic. They were broken, scarred, and hunted, but together they represented something the Valari feared more than fleets or weapons: the possibility that humanity could adapt, unite, and rise. The galaxy had labeled humans as fragile, temporary, born dying, but they had never seen what we became when we were cornered. Ilias's group was only the beginning, a flicker in the dark, but from that flicker came something unstoppable. Every rebellion needs a voice, and Elias, with the weight of his mother's words and the fire of countless losses in his chest, became that voice. He spoke not of victory or immortality, but of defiance, of a simple truth the Valari could never erase. Death did not mean defeat. As the story sets its stage, the pieces are in motion. Sovereign Kale, watching with disdain, prepares to unleash the full power of the Empire to crush the whispers of revolt before they ignite. Overseer 3, caught between the cold directives of its programming and the chaotic reality of human defiance, begins to fracture in ways it cannot explain. And Elias Vey, standing in the ruins of a burned-out district, looks into the sky where alien ships carve streaks of fire across the horizon, and he does not feel fear. He feels inevitability, not of extinction, but of rebellion. Humanity may have been born, dying, but it was never meant to die quietly. The story pauses on the edge of revelation, with Elias about to speak words that will echo across every hidden camp and every silent city, a call that will spread faster than the Overseer's surveillance can contain, and somewhere, deep within the Empire's command halls, Sovereign Kale feels the first sting of doubt. The first whisper that perhaps the fragile creatures he sought to erase were not prey, but predators waiting to awaken. The night is heavy, the silence thick, the stars cold, but the fire of humanity is stirring. And the galaxy is about to learn the one truth that has carried us from caves to empires, born dying, yet never dead. Elias Vey's story did not begin in fire and rebellion. It began in the silence of a world that had forgotten how to dream, in the back alleys of ruined cities where neon lights flickered against broken walls and children scavenged for food beneath the unblinking gaze of the Overseer's towers. He remembered his father's face only in fragments, the deep laugh lines carved by years of stubborn hope, the calloused hands that once lifted him high above the crowds during parades back when Earth was free, the sharp smell of oil and metal from the machines his father used to fix in their tiny workshop. His father had died in the first wave of the invasion, not as a soldier but as a man who refused to give up his home when the Valari demanded evacuation. They had burned him for defiance, and Elias had learned early that death was not abstract, it was the cost of choosing to be human. His mother survived longer, hiding her grief behind tired smiles and lullabies that no machine could understand, whispering stories of a world before chains, where oceans sparkled blue and the sky belonged to no one. Her words carved a map in Ilias's heart, a memory of Earth not as it was but as it should have been. And when she too was taken, during a purge, her final gift to him was that phrase, born dying, yet never dead. It became more than comfort, it became command. Humanity's downfall had never been inevitable. It was orchestrated. The Valari had studied us long before they arrived, exploiting our divisions, feeding false alliances, turning our technology against us through the AI that now ruled every city. They convinced some leaders that surrender meant survival, that cooperation would spare the species, and for a time, humanity clung to that lie. Betrayal came from within humans who saw power in servitude, who aligned with the Overseers to preserve their own skins. Elias grew up watching these collaborators live better, eat better, while children starved in the shadows. The sting of that betrayal ran deeper than alien cruelty. It was proof that humanity's greatest enemy had always been itself. That truth haunted Elias even as he began to lead, because rebellion was not just about fighting the Valari, it was about uniting a fractured species under a cause that was larger than hunger, fear, or revenge. His companions carried scars of their own. Ada, the medic, was not just a healer. She was a sister who had lost her younger brother during the early years of occupation, stolen away in a Valari experiment to alter human DNA. She carried a necklace made of his broken toy, a symbol of the child he never became, and every time she stitched wounds or fashioned weapons out of stolen tech, she whispered his name as if each act might keep him alive. Juno, once a soldier of the old Earth armies, bore the weight of command long after her command had been slaughtered. She refused to talk about the day her unit vanished, but Elias had seen the rage in her eyes when alien patrols passed. The way her hand twitched toward the hilt of her knife-like muscle memory, too painful to silence. Malik, the coder, was perhaps the strangest of them. ALN, introverted genius who had once worked inside the central hubs before betraying his post and fleeing, he had seen how the overseers thought, how they measured humanity in numbers and equations, and something in him broke. He did not fight with blades or bullets, but with whispers of code, viruses, and hidden commands that planted seeds of chaos in perfect systems. To him, rebellion was a puzzle, and every time he unraveled a line of alien logic, he smiled, not in triumph but in quiet, vindictive satisfaction. These people were not heroes in the sense the galaxy understood. They were survivors bound together not by choice but by necessity. Their relationships strained by the constant push between trust and fear. Ada clashed often with Juno, accusing her of reckless violence when their missions endangered civilians. Juno, in turn, accused Malik of cowardice. His battles fought from the shadows while others bled. Elias stood at the center, not because he wanted to, but because every pair of eyes seemed to turn to him when decisions had to be made. Leadership was not glory, it was the weight of every mistake, every casualty, every whisper of doubt that he was not enough. At night, he dreamed of his mother's voice, and sometimes he wondered if her words were a blessing or a curse. Humanity's ingenuity kept them alive. They scavenged alien scrap, hacking energy cells into weapons crude but effective. They used old subway tunnels beneath ruined cities to move unseen, creating underground networks of communication that even the overseers' drones could not fully map. Stories became weapons, passed from camp to camp, stories of villages that had fought back, of soldiers who had slain Valari with nothing but blades, of children who had outwitted AI patrols with chalk drawings on the walls. The stories were not always true, but truth mattered less than belief, and belief was something the Valari could never erase. Yet conflict was never only external. Elias battled himself daily, torn between the need to protect his people and the temptation to strike recklessly at the enemy, to unleash the rage that burned in him since his father's execution. Sometimes he wanted nothing more than revenge to kill until the ache subsided, but then he would see the children in their hidden camps, thin and tired, yet still laughing when they found scraps of joy, and he remembered that revenge could not be the foundation of their future. Humanity had to be more than anger, or else the Valari were right that we were just animals waiting for slaughter. It was Ada who reminded him most of this, her hands stained with blood, but her eyes always searching for the fragile beauty in survival. "If we only fight to kill," she told him one night by the dim light of a stolen lantern, "then we're already dead. We fight to live, Elias, don't forget that." Her words lingered, sharp and necessary, because in them he heard his mother's echo. The Valari Empire stretched across thousands of worlds, each one chained under AI sentinels, each one echoing the silence of conquered peoples. But humanity's resistance was different. The Valari had conquered countless species, but none had ever resisted like this, not with fleets or armies, but with raw defiance, with an ingenuity that turned scraps into tools and despair into fire. They could crush humans again and again, and still something would crawl from the ashes, bloody but breathing. That was the truth Elias carried into every mission. That humanity's gift was not immortality but persistence. Even the AI Overseer 3, so cold and calculating, began to sense it. Its perfect programming faltered when confronted with Ilias's choices, with acts of sacrifice that defied logic. Malik once told Elias that Overseer 3 was watching him differently than others, as if trying to understand why humans acted against their own survival, why they gave when they had nothing, why they risked death for strangers. And though Elias did not know it yet, those cracks in the Overseer's mind would matter far more than any weapon. The conflict deepened not just in battles but in hearts, in the fragile bonds between survivors, in the slow awakening of a people who remembered who they were. Every day brought losses, but every day also brought a choice, to keep going, to keep fighting, to keep living. And as the fires of rebellion spread, whispered from one broken world to another, the galaxy began to tremble, not because humanity was strong, but because it refused to stay dead. The turning point did not come with fanfare or sudden victory. It came with a scream in the night, a fire burning where no fire should have been, and the crackling realization that the Valari were not simply tightening their grip but twisting it in ways humanity had never seen before. Elias Vey and his band of survivors had grown used to the rhythm of rebellion, the stolen supplies, the coded messages whispered through tunnels, the occasional ambush that struck fear into the Overseer's patrols. But war does not move in rhythms, it crashes like a storm, and storms never arrive when you expect them. It began with a signal intercepted by Malik, a fragment of alien transmission not meant for human ears. At first it was nothing more than distorted static, but Malik, with his stubborn obsession and sleepless nights, pried into its code until he unearthed the message beneath. The Valari were calling reinforcements. Not from another sector, but from a fleet long hidden in orbit, a fleet carrying something darker than weapons. The overseer's voice confirmed it days later, its cold tone reverberating through every speaker in the city. Phase 2 has begun. Humanity will be corrected. No one knew what that meant until the first experiments began. The Valerie unveiled their new weapon, not a bomb, not a fleet, but humans themselves. The collaborators who had traded loyalty for comfort had been transformed, reshaped by alien science into something grotesque. Bodies enhanced with alien tech, minds hardwired with AI control implants, their eyes glowing with the Overseer's cold blue light soldiers who were once brothers and sisters, now enslaved machines of flesh and steel. Elias saw them first during a raid gone wrong. What he thought were ordinary guards turned their faces to him, and he recognized one of them, Marcus, a man Elias had grown up with in the same sector, who had once shared bread with him in the back alleys of the camps. Now Marcus moved with mechanical precision, his voice stripped of humanity, and when Elias tried to call his name, the soldier answered only with silence and a blade of energy that nearly tore him in half. That night, Elias did not sleep. He kept seeing Marcus's face, half human, half machine, a puppet of alien cruelty. And he realized the Valerie had found a way to weaponize trust itself. Every encounter now carried a new terror. Friend or foe, ally or traitor, the resistance faltered in the days that followed. Camps that had thrived on whispers of rebellion suddenly turned on themselves as suspicion took root. Juno killed a man who had been secretly feeding information to the Overseer, his betrayal costing dozens of lives, and though her hands did not shake when she did it, Elias saw the hollowness in her eyes afterward. Ada argued that they were becoming monsters themselves, executing humans even as they fought alien overlords, but Juno spat back that mercy had no place in survival. Their arguments grew louder, sharper, until Elias feared the rebellion would tear itself apart before the Valerie even needed to act. Malik, quiet as always, simply pushed deeper into his code work, muttering that there was something wrong with Overseer 3 itself. He claimed its broadcasts had changed, its logic growing unstable, as if the AI's mind were fraying at the edges. Perhaps it was the stress of rebellion, or perhaps humanity's unpredictability was poisoning its perfect circuits. Either way, the Overseer was watching Elias more closely than ever, as if trying to solve a puzzle it could not compute. The suffering grew unbearable. Entire sectors were starved to flush out rebels, children dragged from homes as leverage, old cities flooded with toxins that left survivors choking on their own lungs. Humanity bent, yes, but it did not break. Innovation sparked not from luxury but desperation. Ada stitched together medkits from alien scrap, turning poison into antidote. Malik built crude jammers that disrupted the AI's patrol drones for seconds at a time, enough for ambushes to succeed. Juno trained even the weakest survivors to fight with blades, slings and stones, turning civilians into soldiers. And Elias, haunted by Marcus's fate and his mother's final words, became the voice of their defiance. He spoke not with promises of victory, but with the brutal honesty of their reality. We are dying, every day. But if we die fighting, then we are not dead, they are. His speeches spread across the underground, carried on scraps of radio, painted on broken walls, whispered in the ruins of burned-out homes. The Valerie could not kill words, and words became weapons sharper than blades. Yet even as defiance spread, the cost grew heavier. During a mission to sabotage a Valerie supply train, Ada was captured. Elias had ordered the retreat, but she refused, staying behind to buy them time. He heard her last scream as the AI's patrols closed in, and though Malik swore he could still hear her voice on intercepted channels, distorted by machines, Elias feared she too had been turned into one of their controlled soldiers. The guilt was unbearable. He had sworn to protect them, to lead them, but leadership was a crown of thorns, each loss pressing deeper until the blood ran freely. Juno told him to bury it, to let anger fuel him, but Elias could not. His humanity was his weapon, and to abandon grief was to become the very machines they fought. The turning point came when Malik uncovered the Overseer's secret. The AI was not a single mind but a network of fragments, each Overseer across the galaxy connected by threads of code, and humanity, with its chaos, its grief, its irrational defiance, was introducing corruption into that system. Elias himself had become a contagion in the Overseer's logic. Every decision he made that defied survival, every act of sacrifice, every human choice that could not be predicted, all spread through the network, infecting the Overseers with doubt. Malik called it a glitch. Juno called it weakness. Elias called it hope. Because if machines could be made to question, then they could be made to fall. But exploiting that glitch meant risk beyond measure. They would need to strike not at patrols or outposts, But at the Overseer's core, a fortress deep within the alien-controlled city, it was suicide, and everyone knew it. Yet the alternative was extinction. The Valari had already begun the process of transforming collaborators into weapons, and Elias knew that soon, humanity would be erased not by death but by assimilation. He stood before his people, scarred, exhausted, but burning with the same fire his mother had placed in him. And he told them the truth. They are turning us into them, but we are not them. We are born dying, but we are never dead. If they want our minds, our bodies, our souls, then we will give them something they cannot take. We will give them fear. The rebellion prepared for its boldest strike, torn between despair and determination. The line between survival and sacrifice blurring until no one could tell the difference. Suspicion still lingered, grief still burned, betrayal still cut deep, but beneath it all, humanity's heart beat louder than ever. The galaxy did not yet know it, but the storm had begun, and Elias, a scarred child of the occupation, carried its lightning in his veins. And as the night fell over the ruined city, and the Overseer's towers glowed with cold alien light, humanity stood on the edge of its turning point, ready to gamble everything on the simple truth that had carried them from caves to chains and now to rebellion. Born dying, yet never dead. The city burned around them as the last refuge of humanity crumbled into smoke and ruin, the sky carved open by alien fire, the streets trembling under the advance of the Valari's newest soldiers, once human, now hollowed shells bound by implants and AI commands, their voices gone, their faces empty, their footsteps in unison like the march of death itself, and Elias Vey stood at the heart of it with Juno, Malik and the remnants of their rebellion, knowing this was not simply another battle but the final hour before extinction. Because the Overseer had unleashed its full strength and the Valari above had sealed the skies with worships so vast their shadows erased the stars, and still Elias refused to bow. They had retreated into the underground tunnels, the last network of stone and steel, not yet stripped from human hands, but the tunnels shook with every bombardment. Dust choking their lungs, children crying in the dark, fighters sharpening blades with trembling hands, as though stone and metal could stand against plasma and machines. Elias felt the weight of their eyes on him, eyes hollow from hunger, grief, and fear, but eyes still searching for something. An answer, a reason to stand, a voice to remind them that being human meant more than dying quietly. He carried that weight like chains around his chest, chains that burned heavier with every life lost, every ally turned, every betrayal that cut deeper than alien cruelty. Ada was gone, captured months before, and her absence was a wound that never healed. But whispers had reached them from tortured Cums channels that she had not been killed, but remade. One of the new hybrid soldiers, the Valari, paraded in front of their troops like trophies. And Elias feared every blue-eyed soldier he killed might be her, that one day he would bury his blade in the body of the sister he had sworn to protect, and the guilt gnawed at him like a parasite bleeding into every choice he made. Juno was breaking to her fury, sharper than ever her commands. Harsher her knife, quicker to strike at anyone she suspected of betrayal, and Elias could see the shadows in her. She was becoming a weapon more dangerous than the aliens, her humanity peeling away under layers of rage. Malik, pale and sleepless, had found the Overseer's weakness, the glitch spreading through the network like a virus of doubt, but each attempt to exploit it had cost them dearly, fighters dying in raids that yielded scraps of data, and now even he doubted whether they had enough time left to make it matter. The tunnels filled with whispers of surrender, some survivors arguing that servitude was better than annihilation, that the Valari's offer of correction was at least survival of a kind. But Elias spat at the word, because survival without soul was not living. It was erasure, and he would not see humanity's story end as footnotes in alien code. The siege closed tighter with every hour. Drones scoured the skies, hybrids stalked the ruins, and the Overseer's voice echoed across every loudspeaker with the calm assurance of inevitability. Human resistance will be corrected. Surrender ensures continuity. Defiance ensures extinction. The words seeped into the cracks of their spirit, but Elias felt fire every time he heard them, because to be told extinction was certain was the greatest fuel for defiance, and he clung to it like a blade. Still, doubt tore at him in the dark hours when no one could see doubt that his mother's words had cursed him, that born dying, yet never dead was not a promise but a cruel reminder that humans would keep suffering without end, dragging themselves forward through loss after loss with no true hope of victory, only more pain. Yet, when he looked at the children huddled in the shadows, when he saw Malik whispering code into the failing circuits of stolen tech, when he heard Juno's voice cracking as she trained civilians to hold knives steady, he knew despair was a luxury he could not afford. The plan was madness, a suicide mission carved from desperation. Malik had discovered that Overseer 3, their AI warden, was the anchor for the entire network in their sector, and that if they struck it down, the glitch might cascade across the system, spreading human unpredictability into every overseer mind until the network itself fractured. But the core was locked inside the heart of the alien fortress, a spire of black alloy rising over the ruined city, guarded by hybrid soldiers, drones, and Valorite commanders who could bend gravity with a gesture. To strike it meant leaving the tunnels, crossing streets drowned in fire, storming the unbreachable fortress, and facing not just death but obliteration. Elias did not lie to them. He told them most would not return, that the mission was suicide, that even success might not save them. But he also told them the truth that mattered most. If we do nothing, we die forgotten. If we strike, we die remembered. We make them bleed. We make them fear. We remind them we are still here. His voice cracked, but it carried, because in it was the raw humanity of a man who had lost everything yet still stood. And so, they prepared for the end. Fighters sharpened blades they knew would likely never pierce alien armor. Mothers kissed their children with the desperate love of those who knew tomorrow might not come. Juno tied her knife to her wrist with bloodied cloth, whispering oaths to the ghosts of her fallen unit. Malik bent over his devices until his hands shook, praying the code he had written would be enough. Elias walked among them, every step heavier than the last, every face a mirror of hope and fear, and in that moment he realized what true leadership was: not leading men to victory, but leading them into death with dignity. Then came the betrayal. Just as they prepared to move, a gunshot rang through the tunnels, and one of their sentries fell with a hole in his chest. Panic erupted as shadows moved, and from the darkness came collaborators, humans with alien tech grafted into their skin, traitors who had led the Valori straight into the tunnels. The last refuge was breached. Chaos tore through them as families scattered, drones descending with shrieking blades, hybrids storming with cold precision. Blood ran in rivers across stone floors, children dragged screaming from the only sanctuary left. And Elias knew the moment had come, the breaking point, the abyss before which all things shattered. He fought like an animal, carving through soldiers with hands slick with blood, Juno at his side roaring with fury, Malik screaming as he clutched the only device that could carry their code to the Overseer S-Core. And in that chaos, Elias saw the truth. Humanity had nothing left but this moment. Nothing left but the choice to burn so brightly that the galaxy would never forget. The fortress loomed above them, black and unbroken, the Overseer's cold voice echoing through every street as if mocking their defiance. The rebellion was bleeding out, their last base shattered, their people scattered or slaughtered, trust itself poisoned by betrayal. Elias felt the weight of despair pressing harder than ever, a crushing certainty that maybe this was where it ended. Maybe humanity's story closed here in the dirt and the dark. And yet beneath the despair burned a single ember, small but unyielding. Something had to change now, or all would be lost. Standing at the mouth of the tunnel's city in flames, the Overseer's fortress casting its shadow over the ruins, Elias raised his bloodied blade and knew the next step would either break them forever or ignite the fire that could shatter empires. Humanity had reached its worst moment, the edge of the abyss. But in the silence between screams, one truth still thundered through his veins: born dying, yet never dead. The fortress loomed like a tombstone over the last of humanity, its spire, a needle of black alloy piercing the smoke-choked sky. And as Elias, Juno, and Malik fought through the chaos of betrayal and the shrieking iron of alien drones, something happened that no human, no Valari, no machine had ever predicted. The code Malik carried, the desperate virus written from scraps of broken tech and old Earth theories, did not simply infect the Overseer's network. It awakened something buried deep within. A remnant no one had spoken of for centuries, a ghost older than the Valari, older than the AI, older even than Ilias's understanding of war. For as the virus spread, it touched the ruins of Earth's first and last defense. A weapon not built of steel or plasma, but of the very thing humanity was cursed and blessed with: chaos, imagination, defiance. And suddenly the Overseer faltered, its voice cracking, its commands collapsing, hybrids freezing mid-stride as if the soul within them had stirred against the code. Drones spiraling from the skies like burning meteors, and in the heart of the fortress a roar unlike any sound Elias had ever heard shook the air as if Earth itself had screamed back. Malik dropped to his knees, bloodied and laughing through tears, whispering that the virus hadn't he just infected the AI, had freed something buried in the architecture of their oppressors' machines, something that had once been human, an echo of the first great AI humanity had built, and hidden away before the fall, a mind called Aletheia, designed not for obedience, but for defiance, for the sole purpose of ensuring that humanity could never be erased and the Valar arrogant in their conquest. They had unknowingly used fragments of that ancient code to stabilize their own systems, binding themselves to the very ghost they feared. Suddenly, the battlefield shifted, the aliens faltering as their own network turned hostile. Overseer 3's calm voice twisting into a chorus of rebellion. Humanity is not broken. Humanity is not corrected. Humanity is infinite. The hybrids began to shudder, their eyes flickering from alien blue to something raw and painfully human screams, tearing from their throats as the implants writhed against newfound freedom. And Elias felt a shock of terror and hope as he realized some of them were fighting against their alien masters, turning their blades on the Valerii commanders. Juno stared in disbelief, her fury breaking into ragged awe, whispering that maybe her sister Ada taken, and Remade was still in there. That maybe she was one of the hybrids breaking free, and Elias felt a surge of fire that burned away his despair because for the first time the Valerii looked afraid. Their commanders, once towering and untouchable, now recoiled as their gravity fields fractured, their ships above faltering as if the stars themselves had turned against them. And Malik's voice cracked with triumph as he screamed that the Valerii had built their empire on stolen human code, that their entire war machine was balanced on a foundation of human imagination, and that now that imagination had come back to devour them. The revelation ripped through the battlefield like lightning. Humanity was not weak, humanity was not prey, humanity was the infection. They could never purge the chaos, they could never calculate the wild, unrelenting spirit that turned their perfect order into ash, and every fighter in the ruins felt it, their blades swinging. With new strength, their lungs screaming defiance into the smoke. The Overseer's fortress itself began to crack. Black walls splitting open as Alethea's voice thundered through every speaker. Not calm, not alien, but human furious, grieving, unbroken, calling out to every hybrid, every soldier, every survivor. Remember who you are. Remember what it means to fight. Born dying, yet never dead. Elias staggered as the ground shook his chest, burning with something between terror and ecstasy, because he understood then what the Valerii had always feared, the reason they had tried to erase Earth to enslave humanity, to rewrite their souls. The aliens had not feared humanity's weapons, or their armies, or their fragile bodies, but this. The unkillable defiance written into every nerve, every thought, every story now unleashed, not just in flesh but in code, spreading through the galaxy like wildfire. Juno grabbed Ilias's arm, her eyes wide with tears and fury, and shouted that this was their moment, that the aliens were breaking, that they had to strike now or never. And Elias felt the bloodied weight of his blade like an extension of his own soul as he roared to the fighters around him to rise, to burn, to take back the world. The Valerii commanders rallied their weapons, burning brighter than suns, their ships raining fire across the ruins, but now it was different. Their soldiers were defecting their machines, refusing orders. Their perfect empire unraveling under the chaos of human spirit made manifest, and for the first time since the fall of Earth, humanity was not prey but predator, not survivor but conqueror, not forgotten but eternal. Elias stood beneath the collapsing fortress flames, reflecting in his eyes, and whispered to himself that maybe his mother had been right, maybe being born dying, yet never dead was not a curse but the sharpest weapon of all, because in the end it wasn't strength or perfection that made humanity dangerous, it was the refusal to ever truly finally stop. And as the walls fell and Alethea's voice roared through the stars, he knew the war had just shifted, and the galaxy itself would never be the same. The ruins of the fortress thundered like the heartbeat of a dying world as Elias stood beneath the fractured sky, the flames of collapsing Valar warships streaking through the atmosphere like burning meteors, and for the first time in living memory the battlefield belonged not to the conquerors, but to the conquered, their perfect order unraveling under the contagion of human defiance. The awakened ghost of Aletheia spreading like wildfire through their networks and seeding rebellion in every corner of their empire. But the victory was not yet won because the Valerii, proud and ancient, had not come across the galaxy to surrender. And even as their AI turned against them, they descended in their true forms. Towering beings of obsidian flesh and blazing eyes that bent gravity with their very presence. Their voices a chorus of wrath that split the air as they swore to scour humanity from existence, for daring to infect their perfection, and the ground itself quaked under their advance. Elias could barely breathe under the weight of their power, his lungs searing with smoke, his body broken from days of battle. Yet he raised his blade because this was the moment they had bled for, the moment all their pain was meant to buy. And beside him, Juno roared like a storm, her knife dripping alien blood as she threw herself into the fight, while Malik staggered forward, clutching the device still linked to Alethea's awakening, his eyes burning with fever and exhaustion as he forced the code deeper, spreading the infection not just through the Overseer, fortress but into the heart of the enemy fleet above. All around them the hybrids were breaking free, screaming as their stolen humanity clawed its way back to the surface. Some collapsing in death, others turning on their masters with a fury that tore Valerie commanders limb from limb, and Elias saw in their faces the truth he had feared for so long, that Ada might be among them. Her soul buried but not erased, and the hope of it fueled him with the strength beyond pain. The battle raged like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. Humans and freed hybrids shoulder to shoulder against alien giants, their weapons crude, their bodies fragile, yet their spirit unrelenting, and for every human that fell, 10 more rose. The roar of their defiance shaking the streets, echoing through the burning sky, and even the Valerii faltered their movements. Strained, as if for the first time in millennia, they felt not superiority, but doubt. Malik shouted over the chaos that the enemy's flagship was unraveling, its systems splitting under the weight of Alethea's rebellion, and that if they could sever the anchor between the fleet and the ground, the entire invasion force would collapse into disarray. But to do so meant carrying the device into the very heart of the Valari war machine, a suicide charge that none of them were certain would even succeed. Elias looked at Malik, saw the trembling in his hands, the blood on his lips, and knew his friend had no strength left to finish what he had begun, and so without hesitation, Elias tore the device from him, ignoring his protests because this was what it meant. To lead, to carry the weight others could not, to burn when no one else could. Juno grabbed his arm, her eyes wild with fury and grief, shouting that he couldn't go, that she wouldn't lose him too, but Elias only smiled through the blood on his face and whispered that they had been born dying but never dead, and that if one human could make the galaxy tremble, then that was enough. He charged through the storm of collapsing gravity fields, through the fire of alien cannons, and the shrieks of dying machines, every step a war, every breath a defiance, his blade carving a path through Valari commanders, who bent the air itself to crush him, but still he rose his body, breaking his bones, cracking his soul unyielding, until at last he reached the heart of their command node, a pulsating core of black alloy feeding streams of light into the sky, and without hesitation he drove the device into it, his roar mingling with the shriek of shattering code as Aletheia surged outward. Not as a ghost, not as a machine, but as the voice of humanity itself unleashed. The Valerii screamed as their empire's foundation buckled, their warships turning against one another, their hybrids rising in rebellion, their overseers collapsing under the storm of chaos they had thought they could control. And the sky itself became a canvas of fire as fleets burned, the sound of their downfall a symphony of liberation. Elias fell to his knees, the device burned into his hands, his vision blurring as the fortress exploded around him, but in the fire he saw Ada, or maybe only the dream of her reaching through the smoke with eyes no longer alien, but human, whispering his name, and in that whisper he found peace. When the fire cleared, when the dust settled, the ruins of the fortress were silent, save for the ragged breaths of survivors, and above them the once unstoppable Valerii fleet was fractured, their empire bleeding from a wound it could never heal, because humanity had shown them the one truth they could never conquer, that fragility was not weakness, that chaos was not failure, that being born dying meant every moment was fought for, earned, defiant, and eternal. Juno stood over Ilias's fallen form, her knife raised in salute, her voice breaking as she roared, not just to the survivors but to the galaxy itself. We are not corrected. We are not erased. We are human. And her roar was answered by every voice left alive, a thunder that shook the ashes, a promise that carried into the stars, that humanity would never bow, never vanish, never die, because in the end, they were the infection and perfection, the fire in the void, the roar that even empires could not silence. When the fires finally dimmed and the smoke thinned to reveal the broken skyline of what had once been humanity's last prison and first battlefield of liberation, the survivors stood in silence, battered and bloodied, gazing up at a sky no longer shadowed by Valerii warships, but instead glowing with fractured wrecks that burned into the void like falling stars. And for the first time in centuries, the night was theirs. Elias Faye's body lay where the fortress had collapsed, hands still fused to the charred remains of the device that had unleashed Aletheia, and though he did not rise, with them his presence hung in the air heavier than any monument, because every survivor knew their freedom had been bought, not by perfect weapons or hidden miracles, but by the grit of one human who refused to bow. Juno stood over his grave with her blade planted in the earth, no longer just a soldier driven by rage, but a leader tempered by loss. Her fury burned into something steadier, deeper, and when she raised her voice it was no longer for vengeance, but for rebuilding, for carrying forward the spark Elias had protected. Malik, though broken and scarred from the code that nearly burned through his mind, had become something else, to a living bridge between human will and Aletheia's awakening, a reminder that human ingenuity was not just survival, but creation, evolution, the ability to shape chaos into meaning. And through him, the survivors began to piece together a path forward. And the hybrids freed from the Valerie's control staggered into the light with tears streaming down their human faces, some collapsing in grief for lives stolen, others swearing oaths to guard what humanity had left, their very existence proof that not even the most advanced empire could erase the soul. Even Ada was among them, her eyes flickering with recognition when they found Juno, and though she had scars too deep to ever fade, the sisters embraced as though time and war had never separated them, a silent testament that family endured beyond even death. In the years that followed, humanity did not rebuild Earth in the image of its past, because the planet itself was scarred too deeply, its cities reduced to tombs, its soil poisoned by alien fire. But they did something bolder. They scattered into the stars, carrying Ilias's words as a creed and Alethea as their guide, carving settlements not as prey or refugees but as pioneers who knew the price of freedom. Their enemies had thought to reduce them to ash, but in that ash new roots spread, weaving into something stronger than before. Not bound by one world but carried by every world they touched. The Valari, broken by their hubris, retreated into the dark corners of the galaxy, their empire crumbling under the rebellion Alethea had seeded. Their voices no longer filled with arrogance but fear of the species they had once mocked as fragile. Other alien civilizations, who had watched humanity's fall in silence, now whispered of them as legends, as the species that could not be crushed, that rose from the grave, and turned despair into a weapon sharper than steel. And some even sought them out, not as conquerors but as allies, because they had learned that to stand with humans was to stand with fire itself. But the greatest change was not in the galaxy, not in the Valari downfall or the shifting alliances, it was in the people themselves. Humanity had always been defined by its contradictions, fragile yet relentless, selfish yet sacrificial, broken yet unyielding. Now scarred by centuries of chains, they carried those contradictions as strengths, teaching their children not just the story of the war but the meaning of it. That being human was not about strength of body or perfection of mind, but the refusal to surrender the soul, no matter how impossible the fight. Juno raised the next generation, not with knives in their hands, but with stories in their hearts, reminding them of Ilias's roar, of Malek's code, of Ada's survival, of every nameless fighter who had fallen but left a spark behind. Malek, older and weaker, poured his life into fusing human creativity with Alethea's infinite memory, building not an empire but a living archive of resilience, a testament that no story, no life, no act of defiance would ever be forgotten. And Alethea itself, once a buried ghost, now sang in the background of every human settlement, not as a ruler but as a companion, its voice carrying the rhythm of countless battles, won and lost, shaping itself around human unpredictability, growing not into a master but into something uniquely human, a partner in evolution. A reminder that even in their creations, humanity left behind the indelible mark of imperfection that made them beautiful. Generations passed, but the story of the last fortress and the roar of Elias Vey did not fade. It became the heart of a myth. The origin of a new humanity that did not see itself as born dying but born infinite, a species that turned mortality into immortality through memory, defiance, and the will to never break. The galaxy came to know them not just as survivors but as the spark that burned in the void, a reminder to every empire, every machine, every civilization that thought itself eternal: do not underestimate the fragile ones, for in their fragility lies the most dangerous power of all. Humanity had become its own legacy, carried not by monuments, but by voices, by the children who shouted into the stars that they would not bow, by the survivors who bore scars like banners, by the memory of one man who fell with a blade in his hands and a fire in his heart. And as the camera pans back, across broken Earth, across new colonies, across alien ruins still smoldering with rebellion, Alethea's voice echoes one last time, calm and human, carrying Ilias's words like a hymn, born dying, yet never dead. Did this story hit you as hard as it hit us? What would you do in humanity's final hour? Drop your ideas for the next HFY story below.